Thank you for joining us tonight. We know you have every option in the world for where to follow the news of this remarkable moment in American history. It makes us all the more glad that you are here with us. I'm Rachel Maddow. I'm here with the great Chris Hayes and Nicole Wallace. The one and only Lawrence O'Donnell, who's in the courtroom today for closing arguments in the New York election interference hush money criminal trial of former President Donald Trump. Lawrence is going to be joining us any moment. He is still down at the courthouse. He's going to join us as soon as he can get to a camera, which we think will be momentito, but who knows? Also here on set with us, Ari Melber is here, and Katie Fang is here. Katie was in the overflow room at the courthouse as well today. We're going to be joined over the course of these next 2 hours by Joy Reid and Alex Wagner and Jen Psaki and Stephanie Ruhle, our legal experts, Andrew Weissman. Andrew Weissman is standing by here with us at MSNBC headquarters. We're going to be joining Lisa Rubin, I believe, at a camera just outside the courthouse moments from now. This has all been breaking as we have been discussing about it. There's a lot to get to. We know that even though you know this is important, 8 p.m. until just moments ago, we know it is hard to follow it all in real time over the course of the day, but that is why you have us. So our aim tonight is to catch you up. And let's do it. We're going to talk about the big picture of what happened today. We're going to talk about where we are in the overall process when we are going to learn Trump's fate. We're going to talk about the main points made by both sides in their closing arguments today. We're going to talk about how those points are landing legally and more broadly. We're then going to try to answer some of the questions that came up today at trial, like, for example, why did the judge yell at Trump's defense lawyer as soon as he was done with his summation, right when the jury went to lunch? Why did he say, "I think that statement was outrageous, Mr. Blanche"? We will try to answer that question tonight and more. But we need to start with what has just happened in the last few moments, because the summation from the prosecution literally just ended within the last 5 minutes. So I'm just going to read you. We do not have an official transcript at this point. I'm going to read to you from our reporters updates on what has happened about the way the prosecution's summation concluded. Forgive me for this not being word for word perfect, but this is the best that we've got. Joshua Steinglass is the prosecutor who's giving the prosecution's summation, their closing argument. He says, quote, "Listen carefully to the judge's instructions. It is a crime to willfully create inaccurate tax forms. The defendant, meaning Trump, had an incentive to keep the conspiracy quiet, and post-election, an effort to conceal pre-election is part of the same conspiracy, and to prevent the catch-and-kill scheme from going public. He had every reason to continue to conceal his election fraud. And as Cohen tells you, at the end of 2017, he had already announced his intention to run again. Any single one of the things I just mentioned, those unlawful means, is enough for you to conclude that the Trump Tower conspiracy, meaning the conspiracy that Trump hatched with the company that owns the National Enquirer, the Trump Tower conspiracy violated New York state election law. And the judge will tell you, you don't have to agree, meaning you, the members of the jury, do not have to agree with one another, which unlawful means. The defendant's intent to defraud in this case cannot be any clearer. Why didn't he just pay Stormy Daniels directly, one transaction? Instead, they devised this elaborate scheme, secret FedEx packages, an effort to conceal the truth. He didn't want anyone to find out about the conspiracy to steal the election. Everything was cloaked in lies. Lies in the invoices, lies in the bank paperwork, lies in the 1099, meaning the tax forms that were filed with the IRS, lies in the bank transfers, the shell companies, the encrypted apps, misleading denials. The name of the game, Steinglass says, was, quote, concealment for the man who benefited most, former President Trump. Now, our reporter notes in this moment, Steinglass is getting fired up at this point, speaking up and going rapid fire through the above remarks. Steinglass says to the jury, quote, "You have been a remarkable group. I know this has been a really long summation." Boy, has it. I apologize for trading brevity for thoroughness, but we only get one shot. The defendant has a constitutional right to a fair trial. He has a right to make us prove our burden. There are contracts, emails, and texts that corroborate every bit of testimony. In this particular case, the prosecutor says, the evidence is, quote, literally overwhelming. So now he's gotten that trial. He's had his day in court. And remember, as the judge will tell you, and as Mr. Blanche told you, meaning Trump's defense counsel, as Mr. Blanche told you, the law is the law. There is no special law for this defendant. Donald Trump cannot shoot someone on Fifth Avenue during rush hour and get away with it. Objection from the defense.
No kidding.
Judge Merchan, sustained. The prosecutor. You, the jury, have the ability to hold the defendant accountable. Remember, you are the ones who had the opportunity to hear every witness and see every document. Focus on the evidence and the logical inferences that can be drawn from that evidence. Use your common sense and follow the judge's legal instructions. Steinglass then says to the jury pointedly, quote, come back in here and say guilty. Guilty of 34 counts of falsifying, counts to cover up a conspiracy to corrupt the 2016 election. And then he concludes, in the interest of justice and in the name of the people of the state of New York, I ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you. And he wrapped at 7:57 p.m. Eastern Time, whereupon Judge Merchan told the court and told the jurors, we will get started tomorrow at 10 a.m. Now, why would they be getting started tomorrow at 10 a.m. after the closing arguments just concluded? It's because a very, very, very important thing is about to happen next. We now know it will happen tomorrow, 10 a.m. with the jury. It will be the judge instructing the jury about how to deliberate. And that sounds like, oh, that must be a boilerplate thing. That sounds like that must be, you know, the sort of, do your job, don't be biased kind of generic patriotic instructions they always get. No, the instructions to the jury is very much a contested matter. It has been hotly fought over by both sides. Judge Merchan started today's proceedings by saying essentially to the prosecution and to the defense that he had heard them out in terms of what they wanted from his jury instructions, and he had made his decision. He asked them if they had further comment on what his instructions should be. Neither of them said they did, and so he announced at the beginning of today's proceedings, okay, then, effectively, you know what my jury instructions will be. It is final. That will happen when you are done with the summations. He said that at the very start of what ended up being a very, very long day in court today, starting in the 9 a.m. hour, not ending until just now. We have so much to talk about. It was such a big day. Let's start by going right to the courthouse. Let's bring in MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. She has been at the courthouse for the entire trial. She has been earning her kibble today. Lisa, thank you so much for sticking it out for the whole day. Thank you for joining us from outside. Right now, I have to ask your big picture take overall on how the two sides did with their summation and what you think it's most important for the country to understand about the way this trial concluded today.
I think the way this trial concluded today, Rachel, was with a very exhausted group of people upstairs. Let's start there. And not only the jury, but for example, all the court officers who have been protecting us, protecting this trial, they work as long as the judge says that the jury and the trial is going on. I asked them, well, at what point do you change shifts? And one of them looked at me and said, I'm here until the trial closes today. So you're looking at a group of people, from reporters to the jury, who are all a little bit tired. That having been said, my big takeaway at the end of the day is I feel a little bit like Goldilocks, still in search of the right bed. And that's because if Todd Blanche's closing was very light on detail and long on hyperbole, you got the exact opposite from Josh Steinglass in 4+ hours of excruciating detail, where he ping-ponged between call records and text messages, and every single contact that could be used to corroborate the witness that they didn't want the jury to think this whole case rests on, Michael Cohen. They said Michael Cohen many, many, many fewer times than the defense did. If you were to listen to Josh Steinglass today, the star witnesses here were David Pecker, Hope Hicks, and all of the records, from business records, meaning the 34 business records that are part of the felony counts here, to call records, text messages, emails. And Josh did a very thorough exegesis of the timeline here, starting in August of 2015 at that Trump Tower meeting where the conspiracy was formed, and going all the way through the end of 2018 with Michael Cohen's plea to 2 counts of election violations, one involving AMI's payment to Karen McDougal, the other involving his own payment to Stormy Daniels. And in between, you got everything from Madeleine Westerhout's talking about how Trump signed things in the White House, to details about Jeff McConney and Deborah Tarasoff in the Trump organization in terms of how they process business records, and anything and everything you can imagine in between. So I feel a little bit whiplashed right now, having witnessed both of these closings, because one was so remarkably short on details and evidence and just all about sort of poking little holes and cherry picking evidence, and including some really obvious cherry picking of the testimony that the prosecution was able to refute. And then you've got Steinglass, who in 4+ hours went through every possible piece of evidence and maybe didn't make the sort of selective and judicious choices that somebody who has a little bit more distance would have made in trying to convince a jury who's been sitting here for 6 weeks that they can convict on something less than every single bit of the evidence. And just to underscore to you how detailed his closing was, at one point I looked up at the slides that he was showing. These are demonstratives that sort of encapsulate or summarize evidence. In the bottom right-hand corner, they have numbers on them that I noticed were ticking up with each time their trial tech or their trial technician or paralegal pressed a button to further animate or further the slides. At the last count, when I left the courtroom, they were on slide 420. So
wow.
That might give you a sense of how much detail was packed in there, and why it's hard in many respects to see that forest from the trees, because we were just right in the woods with him today.
Lisa, thank you for that. I want to, I know we're going to be speaking with Lawrence as well, who was also just in there. I want to put what you just said to our lawyers who are also here on the panel with us. Katie and Ari, you were both in the courtroom as well today. What Lisa is describing there about 2 very different approaches to closing, mirrored in some ways by the difference between the openings. I was there for opening statements, and my feeling about the prosecution's opening statement versus the defense's opening statement was that the defense's opening statement was hard to follow, very emotional, sort of emotionally unpredictable, like, why are you yelling now? I don't know where this is coming from. And also just not very linear, whereas the prosecution's was calm, linear, and not as exciting, in part because it wasn't as weird. It sounds like there was a little bit of that in the closing today. This may just be the style of these two legal teams. But as a non-lawyer, I don't know how to translate that style into effectiveness for the jury. What Lisa was describing there makes me worry for the prosecution's sake that maybe they just gave them too much to chew on. What did you think, Art?
I thought it was a strong day for the prosecution because it was voluminous, it was so thorough, and you kind of felt that, and that helped them deal with the Cohen issue. But if you're asking me straight up, it was too long. It didn't need to be this long, and that may or may not matter in the end. But it was longer than it needed to be. I think that's a fair statement. Was
the defense summation, which was first, was it also too long? Was it too short? Obviously, that was like 3 hours, roughly. Yeah. Steinglass, the prosecution went for 4+ hours. What did you think of the length of the defense summation?
The defense also could have been shorter because it still meandered, but it still hammered what it wanted to about Cohen and poking holes for reasonable doubt. I thought the prosecution today reminded everyone why you don't need Cohen, and this is a records case, and there's all of these records. I also would remind everyone, and I know sometimes we are repeating ourselves, but you know, if this were a cooking show, it's not like both contestants have to make a great meal. The prosecution has to have a 5-course perfect meal with every ingredient. And if the defense is able to serve an edible hot dog, that might be reasonable doubt. So I remind everyone at home, if sometimes, because again, we've talked about this, it's sort of like, wait, why are we being so nice to the defense? We're not being nice. The defense has to do less. If they can poke reasonable doubt for one juror more, they could get a mistrial.
Reasonable doubt for something that matters.
Yeah, reasonable doubt on an element of the crime. But yeah, being down there today and watching, I think that it was clear, to the extent that anything changed, it's clear that the prosecution realized we may have a bigger Cohen problem than we even thought, even though we prepared for it. And the sign of that was they opened their big closing arguments, and you just remind everyone how important it is, by saying, okay, first let's talk about Cohen. We already told you he can lie. Here's more than one way to interpret these things. Here's the other things that support what he said. They basically said, if you want to throw this guy out, you can still convict. And that's fine. I think those are all true legal statements. But it showed you that by at least the end of the defense's summation, they were at least concerned enough to want to punch back on that, and then they did their business.
Lawrence has just walked out of the courtroom, and so I want to go to him next, and then Katie, I want to get your take on this as well when we hear from him. Lawrence, you had a very, very, very long day in the courtroom today. I know you've just been able to get out to the camera, so I want to get your instant. Your take, your overall take on what you saw, how things went today, and what you think was important for people to understand about how the summations unfolded.
Longest day I've ever had in a courtroom, Rachel, thanks to the prosecution closing, which I think everyone's going to agree was much longer than it had to be. However, the assistant district attorney is a very compelling speaker. He's very easy to listen to. And so you could be 2.5 hours into it and not feel as if you were 2.5 hours into it. By the time you were 4 hours into it, you knew you were 4 hours into it, as was inevitable. He had some really, really powerful moments. He did his own imagined version of the 90-second phone call that's in dispute in this case, where, according to Michael Cohen, he called Keith Schiller. He spoke to Keith Schiller about some harassment he was suffering, and then he spoke to Donald Trump for the remainder of the 90 seconds. And we saw the assistant DA basically come up with an entire version of that conversation and how that could have gone in 49 seconds. So it was one of those moments in the courtroom that was very impressive, very, very, very effective. But sorry, he you know, this is a kind of he's the kind of student who really fills up the exam paper. You know, doesn't leave anything out. And oddly enough, it did not feel that repetitive. That's the funny thing about it. But the essence of it was basically, look, this was in fact a reimbursement. In fact, there was a moment there where he rattled off all of the reasons why this was a reimbursement to Michael Cohen and not a big paycheck. And at the end of all of the reasons he gave for it being a reimbursement, and then going to the Trump position that it's not a reimbursement, his loudest moment in the courtroom today was saying, does anyone believe that? And I think he's right. There's no one on the jury who does not believe that that was indeed a reimbursement arrangement for Michael Cohen. And the question here for this jury is just, is Donald Trump guilty in a falsifying business records scheme that was entered into in order to corruptly affect an election? And that may be, for the jury, a complicated question.
Lawrence, can I just ask you, in terms of Todd Blanche's summation, a lot of reporters today described that as hard to follow, as being, because he wasn't going chronologically the way the sort of exhaustive summation from the prosecution went, that Blanche's summation was sometimes hard to know what he was getting at, what point he was trying to make, other than going liar, liar, liar at Michael Cohen and trying to make the fact that Michael Cohen has been proven to lie something that should be fatal to the case. Was it in fact hard to follow?
Well, listen, I've watched an awful lot of criminal lawyers in my life trying and struggling to defend a guilty client. That's what it looks like. There's no good way. There's no easy way. I don't see how Todd Blanche could have done any better, actually, in his summation today, given the facts that he's loaded down with, given the complexities that he failed to deal with. And the DA pointed out this point that I've been making steadily about the defense argument, which is that it's an argument in conflict with itself. Because the defense argument is Michael Cohen was paid this big paycheck in 2017, and it had nothing to do with reimbursement of the $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. But we know, and the defense knows, that the calculation of how much he would be paid was based on a document handwritten by Alan Weisselberg that includes the $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. That's never been explained by the defense. Not at any point did that get explained. And then the DA made this point when he got up to speak, saying, look, you can't accuse Michael Cohen of stealing in the reimbursement scheme if you're also saying he was never reimbursed. And so that's the central problem that the defense has, is that it has theories crashing into each other, and in one side of their theory, they are fully adopting the prosecution case, which is Michael Cohen was reimbursed. But when the defense adopts the idea that Michael Cohen was reimbursed, they then say that in the formula for the reimbursement, Michael Cohen lied and he managed to steal $30,000. So you cannot, as the DA said, you cannot accuse him of stealing and then say he wasn't reimbursed. You can't have that both ways. And so that was one of those things, you know, as a trial develops, you sit there and you wait. When there's something really tough for one side, you just should sit there and wait to hear that side address the most difficult thing they have. And the most difficult thing the defense has is that number, $130,000, written in Alan Weisselberg's handwriting on that document. And the defense has never explained it. They've never come close to explaining it. And the prosecution made that very, very clear today, that they've never explained that difficult thing. The difficult challenge for the prosecution today, laid out to them by the defense argument, was Michael Cohen's a liar. You cannot convict Donald Trump on the testimony of Michael Cohen, and it is only Michael Cohen's testimony that says Donald Trump knew and approved the payment of Stormy Daniels before the election. That evidence comes only from Michael Cohen, and the defense insisted you cannot find Donald Trump guilty based on that testimony from Michael Cohen. And so the prosecution did a lot of work on that very point, and did an awful lot of work on corroborating Michael Cohen as much as they possibly could on that very point. And so the prosecution was not afraid to go after the most difficult challenge posed by the defense, but the defense never came close to the most serious challenges posed by the prosecution.
Yeah, we had the prosecution. That was clearer to me in the transcript than anything else that I have seen in terms of the heart of the case and the fight between the prosecution and the defense, is that the prosecution is able to say, here are two documents that are smoking gun documents. And yes, they have something to do with Michael Cohen getting paid, but the reason that we have these documents is that they have been corroborated by other Trump organization personnel. And that is why they are in evidence, and there is no contrary explanation from the defense as to what these smoking gun documents might mean. And that just feels to me to be the sort of unassailable core of where we are. And for all of the time that Joshua Steinglass spent talking today, I mean, that was my biggest takeaway. We've got smoking guns that you can't say anything about, and you haven't.
Yeah, and the defense doesn't have any comparable so-called smoking gun. There's nothing comparable to that on the defense side of the case.
Lawrence O'Donnell, I know you need to leave where you are standing in order to come sit with us. So please travel safely. We'll see you as soon as you get here. All right. On that point, in terms of the overall scope of what each side tried to do, but also the salient points that the jury will be able to both remember and may be decisive to them. Do you agree with Lawrence's take there?
I want to disagree with everybody's take to some extent, and I want to kind of bring everybody grounded back into what the realities are. This jury never stayed past 4:30 until now, and this trial has taken it's taken less time than before. So this was a long thing, but this is real life. This is how real trials go. When you have closings, they go long. That being said, Trump is a style over substance guy. So I'm not surprised that his lawyers are style over substance. And you would think that somebody like Todd Blanche, having the experience that he does, would be able to deliver something that was more compelling. So it would be irrelevant if he took 2 hours or 10, if it was going to be compelling. And that's where he loses out to the prosecution. So the prosecution not only has the style from Joshua Steinglass being compelling, clear and concise, but he also has the substance, and that's why. So when you have Todd Blanche get up and say, Michael Cohen is the MVP of lies or the gloats, the greatest liar of all time. Maybe he was the greatest lawyer of all time, for Donald Trump, right? But when you hear that, you're like, yeah, you snicker a little bit, maybe you chuckle, but that's all you got? And that's really what it is. And so I take umbrage with the idea that this was too long. The prosecutor made it clear this is his only shot. And the jurisdiction's very important to clarify as well. In Florida, for example, if you're the prosecution, you get the sandwich. You go prosecution, defense, prosecution, rebuttal. You don't get that here. So you get the defense to go first and then the prosecution. And so, Steinglass had it prepared, but he also had to pivot a little bit based upon what he heard or maybe what he didn't hear during the defense's closing argument. And so that is why I think you saw it a little bit longer. But you knew it was going to be meaty because you saw it in the openings. And Lawrence, very quickly, when he noted that 49-second reenactment, there is a power in being able to stand up in front of a jury. And I've done this in trials that I've done before when timing is in dispute. And there's no way that you could ID the defendant victim because you only saw the defendant for 15, 20 seconds. Right. And what you do is you stand there in silence for 15, 20 seconds. And so when you had Joshua Steinglass today reenact, and not in a rushed manner, the call that remember Blanche spent so much time during his 4-day cross on this October 2016 call. And Steinglass got up and in 49 seconds, he dismantled the entirety of that. So that's the substance that's going to, no pun intended, trump any style that may come from the defense.
Nicole.
It was also their choice to stay. I mean, Judge Michon stopped at 4 and 5 and 7. I mean, he kept giving them off-ramps. If they were tired or done, they could have left. He said at the beginning of the day, it will be entirely up to them. So the length of the day was not Michon's decision. It wasn't Steinglass's decision. It was the jury's decision. I bring zero expertise to the legal front, except getting picked. I've been a juror. And I had Ken Burns on today, and I'm just so sort of hostage to the story piece of it. And I think, you know, to sort of steal Ari's analogy, you know, one person has to write like Shakespeare, the other one like a Trump tweet, right? But I don't even think they did that. And what the prosecution had going for it today was the ability to say, take the sex. Sex happened in 2006. Why do you think they paid for it 2 weeks before Election Day?
Right.
On every element of what they're trying to prove, and they said there are only three. I mean, the three were, you know, if the records were fraudulent, if Trump inspired them to be fraudulent, and if the, you know, election was an additional criminal element. I mean, they're asking them to decide three pretty narrow things.
Was this about the election? Were the records false? And did Trump
cause them to be made? Right. And you didn't even have to write them or sign them, but is he the cause of it? And I think as a story that was told through every witness. And look, I have no idea what the jury's going to do. We have no idea how they experienced any single witness, any single day, any single direct, any single cross. But if they have to process a story, I don't know what story they were told about Trump's experience, and I don't know what they stitched together based on the fact that the one witness Trump's side put out was an absolute home run.
যাইবার কালে সোনা বন্ধে নয়ন তুলে চাইল না যাইবার কালে সোনা বন্ধে নয়ন তুলে চাইল না আশি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইল না গো আশি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইলো না যাইবার কালে সোনা বন্ধে নয়ন তুলে চাইল না যাইবার কালে সোনা বন্ধে নয়ন তুলে চাইল না আশি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইলো না গো আশি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইলো না আসবে বলে আশাই রইলাম আশাতে নৈরাশা হইলাম আসবে বলে আশাই রইলাম আশাতে নৈরাশা হইলাম পাটাতে পান সাজাই রইলাম বন্ধু আইসা খাইলো না পাটাতে পান সাজাই রইলাম বন্ধু আইসা খাইলো না আশি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইলো না গো আশি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইলো না সুজন বন্ধুরে চাইলাম মনে বড় ব্যথা পাইলাম সুজন বন্ধুরে চাইলাম মনে বড় ব্যথা পাইলাম আমি শুধু তার গান সে আমার গান গাইল না। আমি শুধু তার গান গাইলাম, সে আমার গান গাইল না। আসি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইল না গো, আসি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইল না। আব্দুল করিম চিন্তা করে এর সাথে যাবে মরে। আব্দুল করিম চিন্তা করে এর সাথে যাবে মরে। আসে যদি মরণ পরে আমারে সে পাইল না। আসে যদি মরণ পরে আমার সে পাইল না। আসি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইল না গো, আসি বলে গেল বন্ধু আইল না। যাইবার কালে সোনা বন্ধে নয়ন তুলে চাইল না। যাইবার কালে সোনা বন্ধে নয়ন তুলে চাইল না। আসি বলে